Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today, Masechtas Makkot stop Yud Daled. We are going to begin on Yud Daled Aleph, the fourth line from the top. Rav Yitzchak Omer. So we learned a three-way machlokas. When does a person receive malchus, even if there is another punishment? According to one opinion, you can still get malchus by chayvi misas beistin as well as chayvi kares. Rabbi Kiva says it depends. When you chayv kares, you can still get malchus because sometimes you could do tshuva and the kares will be removed, so it's not an issue of k'nei rishaso. Mashen came by misas beistin, in which even if you did tshuva, you still get killed, and therefore there's no malchus. And then we had this third opinion, Rav Yitzchak Omer chayvi krisis b'chlal hoyu. So chayvi krisis is mentioned in a general category, but lomi yotz. So why is it specifically mentions kares b'chosa by cohabiting with your sister? L'dona b'kares lo malchus, to tell you that even when it comes to chivi kare krisus, you only get kares, you do not get malchus. So that's how he learns out the fact that it says achoso, it says kares. Why does it specify it? So it must be to tell you that it's dafka kares and not malchus. Rabbanan kares mechosa lamali. So why taka does it say it there? L'chalik, to make a distinction. In other words, because you would maybe think it's only, as Rashi says, im osin kulam behelm echad enu chayv el achas, that let's say you committed numerous averos of being with these arayos, so you would only be chayv one. No, so chalik to tell you you're chayv on each one. Okay. Okay, Yochanan, the Rabbi Yochanan, Shim Osin Kulam Behelm Echad Chayv El Kolach Achas. You're chayv each one. So apparently, Rabbi Yitzchak should agree with that. So L'chag Menole. So how does he know this din? So nafkali he learns from a different pasuk. Mavel Isha Benina's two muscle regarding to a woman who is a nida, in which there's also a punishment of kares. So L'chayv El Kol Isha V'Isha. L'chayv on each one. So therefore, we went out from this pasuk because the pasuk Rashi says it could have just said lanida lo sikrav. So therefore, you're chayv on each one. Rabbana nami typically miha. So why don't we learn out from nida and a chanami? Right, we can learn l'chalik from nida. So then the kasha again goes back. The chorus the achaisa lamli. So why does it mention chorus by achaisa? L'chayvo al chaisa v'alachas am v'alachas imo. To chayv you on your sister, on your father's sister, and your mother's sister. So pshita, hari gufim mechlokin, hari shemes lechlokin. If they're different people, they're gufim mechlokin, so obviously you're going to be chayv on each one. El chayv al achais, so shehi achais aviv, shehi achas imo. Vehechi mishkachas lo b'rishia b'rishia. So if it's the same woman that she is your sister, your father's sister, and your mother's sister, which is only if not only are you a Rasha, but also your parents are Rishayim, then the chiddush is that even though it's the same person, even though they're separate, they're different shemos, but since we say that gufin are not muchlakin, and therefore you're chayiv only on one. Okay. Says Rashi. So obviously, again, you'd be chayv on each one if there's different asharos. So we say b'rishia b'rishia. What is that talking about? So habal al imoy, a guy has tashrus with his mom. The hoylid shtei banais, and they end up having two daughters. The chazer ubal achas mehen, and this guy who already had tashrus with his mother now, and the mother has a baby, a girl, two daughters. And then he has tashmish with one of those daughters, which is also his daughter, because it's his mother, so it's also her sister. The hoylid ben, and then he has a son, uva ben al achas imoi, and then the son has tashmish with his mother's sister, shia choiso, which is your sister, the achos of him, and it's also your father's sister. Okay, so in that case, that's what it's coming to include. To tell you that you're chayiv on all of them. So pofakir, it's the fact that even though since it is shemus muchlakim, you're chayiv al kolach v'achas. Okay, So Hig Mishkachach Sla Bershiba Rishus. Rabbi Yitzchak Kamanale. How does he know such a situation? Nafim Bekavachayim Desanya. Rabbi Kiva Shalti Rabbi Gamliel Rabbi Yeshua Beitliz. He asked the kasha in Itliz, which is a meat market. It says Rashi Makom Shemoichin Habasar Shel Imuim. Shaholchu Likach Behema Lemishna Benoisha Rabbi Gamliel. They want to bring some food. They want to buy some meat for Rabbi Gamliel's sons. There was a party. So Habal so Shihi Achosav Shihi Achosimo Mahu. Eno Chayav Al Kuno Al Achas O Chayav Al Koach Achas. Are you Chayav once or multiple times? So Amalod, so they said back to him, Zulo Shemanu. I never heard an answer to that question of a Shemanu, but I heard the following. Habal Chamish Nashim Nidois Behelmech. If a person attached with 5 different women who are Nidois at the same state of forgetfulness, Shechayv Kolach Zviachas. Then the end of Reim Mekabachaimer. Ma Nidashi Shem Echad, even though it's the same Isser, nonetheless Chayv Kolach Zviachas. So Kan Sheshloish Shemois. Here we're talking about there's 3 different Isurim, so Koshikin, certainly you should be Chayv Kolach Zviachas. V'idach Kavachemer Prichahu. You can ask a kasha because Mal Nidish Chen Gufim Mechlakim, they're different people. So maybe that's the reason why I Chayv separately, but maybe not if it's the same woman. Well, Idach Nami Havadi Kavachemer Prichahu. It's still good. It's a kasha. It's definitely a pirch on the Kavachemer. Ela Nafkele, you can learn it out. Ma'achaiso de Seifa. The fact that it says Achaiso later on in the pasuk as well, so we can learn out the drasha from there. The point is that even though it's true you're bichayev on your sister, but we also learn if it's your half sister, your father's sister, your mother's sister, even you can say, well, it's a kavachayimer. If you're chayiv on half your sister's or half sister, so you should certainly be chayiv on your whole sister. But we learned out previously on Daf Hey, I believe was that that we don't learn out a kavachayimer to punishments, because as we've said numerous times throughout this masechta, part of the notion of getting a punishment is also for kapara. So maybe only you, who had tashmish, let's say, with a half sister, is chayiv kares, but someone who is with a whole sister, it's much worse. So therefore, that's why Einoch min adin. So Idach, how does he know this? That you're chayiv on your sister who is your bas aviv, or your al achaiso bas aviv, your father's daughter, your sister who's only from your father's side and from your mother's side. So Yiboy say megamer einish me'azhara. You can learn out the einish from the azhara. Rashi says, because by the azhara it says achaischa, which is extra, to tell you that you're chayiv on bas avim v'bas imo. As the pasuk says, ervas bas eshes avicha, moledus avicha chaischahi. So mazhara, just like over there, we don't make a distinction whether it's your sister from your father's side, father's daughter, your mother's daughter, or a choso, which is both. So two, when it comes to punishment, we don't make a distinction. So that's one answer. The Iboy say manafkel, we can learn it out as we continue to Yud Daled Amud Beis. Maybe we can learn it out mi'achayso duration from another achayso, because Rashi says the matzi l'michtav ki yikach es bas aviv o bas imo. Fine. Ve'idach hahuma boyle l'chal kares l'mafatem l'soch. That he learns it out to tell you that, as we saw in Mishnah and Yud Gimel, that if a person is mafatim, if he produces the spices or the anointment oils, that even though these are considered 2 separate lavim, and therefore you would maybe think, but since you did it at the same time, you're chayiv one, so it's tell you you're chayiv on both, just like you're chayiv al kol achs v'arayas. The idach savik Rabbi Lezer Marboisha, the Rabbi Lezer Marboisha, kol makam shiata. Anytime where you might shnei lavin v'kares echad, when you find 2 situations, 2 lavin, but it's only mentioned kares once, cholken hein lekarbin. So chalukin hein lekarbin. So the whole distinction is davka when it comes to a carbon. That's the distinction. This is actually going to be TA15, which I got wrong, because it just throws itself in there. But let's look in Rashi first. Miboile, where's that Rashi? Shehen shnei lavin. So it's brought them at this krisa. Shehin shnei lavin al basar adam lo yisach umiskavanasai lo sasu kamahu. Because achas ish asher yirkach, it says chorus once. Ish asher yirkach kamahu v'yashiyitin memenu. Fine. So we say mechalkin l'chatos. So we say with regard to the carbon, v'kivan de'osol hachi. Since we came on to this, b'arayis nami lo boy chiluk v'lo mitzdarech le l'drash l'medrash el ish adul el. So basically, let's look at question TA 15. Amr b'lezer kol makom shata moita shnei lavan v'karas echad chalukin hin l'carbon. That you're they get separate carbonos chatois, and that's referring to mafatim v'sach, specifically the Shem and Hamishcha. The boy sayma will suffer Rabbi Lezer. Maybe he doesn't hold like that sheet of Rabbi Lezer. But nafkali maybe isha sheyishkav es isha dava, that a man who lies down with a woman who has this flow, which is referring to kares of a nida, and each kares is separate. So v'idach what does he do with that pasuk? Huma boy like Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan, Shem Ben Yochai, Menayin she'ena isha tameya ad shiatz medava derech ervasa. The only time is if it comes out of her erva, the dam. Shneimar v'isha sheyishkav es isha dava v'golas ervasa v'gamar mulam shina isha tama just medava derech ervasa. So how does he know that? Then we just stop with that, but that's certainly something to contemplate as well. Okay, so let's look at question 1. Well, miyatze kares b'chayso. Why is it mentioned kares by the sister and nowhere else? So either we learn to tell you that you get kares and not malchus, or according to the other mandir, it's l'chalik. She mustn't cool mehel mechad chaybal kolachas v'achas. So that is the other explanation, l'chalik, which again is on, that's Yud Daled Amud Aleph. That's also TB 16, which is the same question. So I'll just mark that down here. That's TB 16. Okay. Right. So let's continue. So the Mishnah gives other examples where you're chayav kares, and one is v'tami she'achal kodesh. So it mentions a case if your son is tameh and he ate that shachal is hektish, he ate hektish, or b'habaya al hamikdash tameh, if you enter into the base of mikdash while you're tameh. So all these cases, you're chayav kares as well as malchus. Okay. So obviously this shita is not like Rabbi Lezer, who says you don't get malchus and kares. Fine. Now bishlam habola mikdash tameh. I can understand if you enter into the base of mikdash while you're tameh, ksiv oinish. It says the punishment, ksiv ashara. It also mentions the warning, so therefore it makes sense why you get malchus. Oinish dechsiv es mishkan Hashem timeh. You enter in the mishkan while you're tameh v'nichrosa, and you get kares. And there's also nashara v'yitamu es machnehem. They're not should not be matam your camps. So it makes sense when it comes to a person who enters the base of mikdash in the status of tuma that you're chayav kares in your malchus. Ela tami shaychas hektish. I understand why if you're tameh and you eat hektish, what do we see? You're going to be chayav malchus and kares. Now bishlam oinish ksiv hanefesh heshetaychel basim is mezevach hashlom emashel Hashem v'tumas olav. It says that tumas olav while you're tameh v'nichasa. So it clearly says an oinish, the punishment of a person who does this. Ella's haram nine. Where do we find an additional warning which is necessary? Shakashamer b'chol kaidish lusiga. We learn b'chol kaidish lusiga that a person is not allowed to touch that which is kaidish, and here we're not saying it's specifically touching; it's referring to eating, and therefore it's saying that someone who's tummy who's eating hektish is going to be chayiv as well, because the pasuk b'chol kaidish lusiga. You have Yochanan Tani Bardula Asi Tumasa Tumasa. He actually learns that Exer Shavak. Sivha Chavatumaso Allah Nechosa. So we say in our pasuk the oinish of a person who is Tame who eats hektish, we have v'tumasa olav v'nitmasa v'nichusa. V'ksiv hasam tamiyeh oy tumasu boy. Malha onish v'azhara avkan onish v'azhara. So according to the Shita of Rabbi Yochanan, he does not learn out from B'chol Kodesh L'Siga as an Azhara, but rather he learns out through Gzer Shava, the Azhara. But either way, they both hold the same thing. They're going to be Chayev, Kares, and Malchus. Bishlam, Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan, Gzer Shava, Gomer. He doesn't hold the Gzer Shava, so obviously he has to come out to the Pasuk, B'chol Kodesh L'Siga. Or Rabbi Yochanan, my time, will learn Reish Lakish. So why is he holding Reish Lakish? Why is he holding this Pasuk? So Amulachahu, that pasuk of B'chol Chodesh L'Siga is actually azhara with truma. It's an azhara regarding truma. That's what it's talking about. Says Rashi, specifically, the azhara is l'negias truma, touching truma while you're tamei. So that's B'chol Chodesh L'Siga is either eating hektish or touching truma. So that's why Rabbi Yochanan says that because of that, he needs to come onto the Gzer Shava. Okay? Fine. So, again, how does he know there's an azhara for touching truma while you're tamei? So, naflim ishish mizer Aaron, who's saru azav, a person who's tamei, ezehu davar shehu shavu bizar shel Aaron. It says the zera of Aaron, who is where we say that everyone can eat. Haviyam mizu truma. This is referring to truma because there's certain things like hektish that you can't eat unless you're if you're a balmum, you can't eat. But by truma we're more mekel, so any kohen can eat from this. So therefore, this is the source that when it comes to while you're tamei, like for example, you have saras, you're a zav, that you're not allowed to touch truma. V'idach, what does he do with that pasuk? Hahu lachila, hahu lachila, v'hal negia. I have one pasuk to say you can't eat truma. The other one says you can't touch it. Reish Lakish, Hai B'chol Kodesh L'Siga. That's it. So Reish Lakish, Hai B'chol Kodesh L'Siga. Hachil Das, is it true that Reish Lakish runs out from the pasuk B'chol Kodesh L'Siga that a person whose tummy cannot eat kodesh? Hahu meboil tummy shenagav hektish. I thought we learned that for someone's tummy who is not even to touch hektish, right? So Hachil Das, Hahu meboil. Well, Ditmar, and I'll prove this to you. It's not eating hektish, but it's touching hektish. Ditmar, tummy shenagim b'kodesh. Let's say someone's tummy touches kodesh. Rishokish amar loika, Rabbi Yochanan amar eno loika. So machlokas. Rishokish amar loika. Why? B'chol kodesh l'siga. Now the language says b'chol siga, touching, which sounds more clear that it's talking about touching hektish. You're going to be chayav malchus. But therefore, we don't have a pasuk therefore to tell us that if you eat hektish that you're chayav malchus and carbon and kares. If Yochanan in loikana who has her truma who to asa. This pasuk is hard for truma as we said before. So the kasha is, how could we say that according to the shita of Reish Lakish that it's coming to tell you that if someone who's tamei can't eat hektish, it's coming to talk about that you're to touch hektish, and if you do, you're chayav malchus. So tamei shenagah b'kodesh, the notion of touching it mid afki rachman b'osh negia. The fact it says the language l'siga tells you obviously you can't touch it. Azhara, when it comes to its warning, mid iskish, that's what it says on the side, kodesh hamikdash. So we make a hektish from just like a person can't enter in the base of mikdash while you're tamei, and we said there was an einish and a zhar for that. So too, a person who eats kodesh is the same thing. It's I thought someone who eats someone who's tamei who eats basar kodesh lifnei zrikas damim before the blood is sprinkled. Now lifnei zrikas damim, no one is allowed to eat it, but the tamei there's an additional punishment. Didmar tamei shachal basar kodesh. Kodesh lifnei zrikas damim. Rishakish amar loika. Rabbi Yochanan loika. Rishakish amar loika. B'chol kodesh l'siga. There's you're not to touch it. Loshno lifnei zrika. Loshno lachar zrika. Rabbi Yochanan amar eno loika. He doesn't get malchus. Rabbi Yochanan tamed yamar kra tumasu tumasai. V'chiksiv tumasu lachar zriku dichsiv. It's only after zrika there's an isser of the tummy person, but before zrika, no. Now, according to Reish Lakish, apparently this pasuk is not coming to tell you about eating or touching hektish, let's say touching hektish, but rather it's coming to talk about your chayiv, that your chayiv, someone who's tummy who ate it b'lifnei zrikas damim. Right? It says hahim b'chol kodesh nafka. Tan gavas Reish Lakish. B'chol kodesh lo siga azhar l'achol. It's not as hard to eat. I thought it was just to touch. It's the issur to touch hektish. Makish kodesh mikdash. Ma mikdash, just like enter the base of mikdash tamei davar sheishmon netilos neshama yechayv karis af kol davar sheishmon netilos neshama the imenigia miikon netilos neshama elabachila. So if we're making this comparison, there's no way you can say that a person who just merely touched hektish that you're going to be chayav kares. No, there's no netilos neshama regarding that. Therefore, it must be talking about achila. Okay, let's look at question 2. We're going to stop there. B'chol kodesh lo siga elu isurim lomad reish lakish mahaykra l'das Rav Yochanan ein loikalayan. So there's 2 things. First of all, tamei shenaga b'kodesh, and also tamei she'oichel basar kodesh kodim zrika. So those are the 2 situations where there's a Makkot and Rav Yochanan based on that pasuk. Okay, TA we did already. TB 17 possibly. Yisrael Oynish Shigirish Adkan.